So, I'm Mariam. I am part of AWS Women in Cloud, and I want to talk about how you can lift juniors into the cloud. So I assume for some people, you've reached a point in many aspects of your role and career where you sat and thought, the skills that I actually started off with isn't enough. And for me, that was when me as a web developer sat down and I went, I'm actually really struggling with this cloud stuff. So I want to take a bit of a step back. I'm just going to test which button goes next. That one, cool. So I'm Mariam, and for those wondering, the outfit that I'm wearing in that one is a traditional Libyan outfit. Happy to answer questions about it later. I work as a software engineer in Slalom. You might be sat there going, she's a software engineer, she's not a platform engineer or a DevOps engineer. Yes, I know. I also work as an ambassador for Code First Girls. We're very passionate about uplifting women and getting them into that journey to enter and prosper in tech. And through that, I create accessible content on TikTok. About 2.5 years ago, I actually started off mostly in React and TypeScript. If TypeScript has got no fans, I'm dead. But TypeScript is and was my bread and butter. But there came a turning point in my career where about a year into my work at Slalom, I started to sit there and go, I don't really want to label myself as a web developer anymore because I don't feel like I align with it. I understand that I do stuff as full stack, but over time, through the customers and the projects that I came to experience at Slalom, I started to realize that there's this bigger picture. So that would include software, testing, and DevOps. And this is a thought process a lot of juniors and people starting that journey in cloud are going to go through, where they start to think really granular and low level about the code. And then over time, they start to see this bigger picture about deploying, about maintaining, even stuff like the business impact of what it is that you're putting together for your end user, for your customer, and for the business. And one of the big pictures that I started to come across, and many others will start to come across, is the software development lifecycle. I'm sure everyone is familiar with this here. And at that 1 year mark, I placed myself at this implementation stage. I could not care how my code got up into the cloud. I was like, if my code is clean, scalable, maintainable, I did my job. But now, 2.5 years ago, I'd probably punch myself in the face and go, you should actually care about switching side to side, more to the right, sometimes to the left. And in your teams, you may have people in this situation where they may be in one area, they may be looking to get and start to tinker around with cloud, but they don't really know how to start. And one of the best tools I like to use to explain this journey, and I know people may have beef with Dunning-Kruger, I don't, but there's going to come a point where you have juniors or you have a developer who may need to do some cloud work. So they may need to look at spinning up a resource, configuring something, or even something as simple as looking at what's going on in a pipeline. And sometimes they're at what's called the Mount of Stupidity. And I was actually here, and sometimes I still am here. And at the Mount of Stupidity, you get really comfortable in what you know. And for me, that was TypeScript. If you want me to spin up a website, I'm your girl. But the moment you start to go beyond that, the more you start to shift to the right, some people may experience this decline into what's called the Valley of Despair. And this is a moment that a lot of people who are either starting their career in cloud, or someone like me who's more familiar with software, which just started working with AWS, for example, this is a point that you really need to get people out of. And what I'm here to talk about today is how do you actually get them up to this point? I don't like the word expert because I believe no one is an expert in anything ever, but what they can be an expert in is how they can best learn. So, an example of how I got to this level of how I best learn is a few months ago, I got put on a project at Slalom with a bunch of platform engineers. I was the only software engineer on that team. And the first ticket that I picked up was a CDK ticket. It was configuring CloudWatch alarms. And I was sat there like, what the hell is CDK? I've never heard of it. And this is a screenshot of my browser on my laptop. You can see which links I've clicked to figure out what CDK is. And I approached the team. I'm very thankful to work with a very empowering, uplifting team. And I explained to them, I'm not really familiar with this stuff. I do want to contribute, and I do want to learn. And we sat and we talked about not the confidence issues that I had about it, but what we could do about it. How do I get myself out of this valley of despair? And they turned around and they just said, just break a whole bunch of stuff. They said, we don't care, break the pipeline, break whatever things you've spun up. And what that looked like for me and my team was sandboxes. I know sandboxes can be a costly resource. I know sometimes businesses may not be keen on spinning them up, but we were fortunate to have a dev, test, and prod environment. So anything in CDK, I was actually encouraged to tinker around on the console first on AWS, then try to translate that into code, and then deploy that code and see how did it spin up. If the pipeline went red, what's happening there? And more importantly, understanding the thing that you spun up, what is that actually bringing to the end user and to the business? And for this specific project, this was an infrastructure migration from on-prem to using AWS. So it's understanding that aspect of it. So over time, I'm still on this project, but I started to understand what CDK was. I started to understand the best ways of work for DevOps and for platform work. And we use quite a few different tools. So for me to go from that I don't know to CDK is we utilize a variation of Free Amigos, we encourage reading, but the most important part for me is they actually just told me to take my time. So if a ticket was expected to be done in X days, if it was done in X plus 3 days, that was fine, as long as I understood what I was doing. And this is the part that really made me realize I actually want to come up here and talk about it, is it didn't actually matter what my team did to get me to start breaking stuff, to deploy stuff, to understand what was happening, as someone who's more to the left in software. So what you should be sit here asking is, not how much did that sandbox cost you, but how do I get my junior to break stuff? Because this is a reality, and this is something that happened to me a year ago, is if someone told me, we want you to spin up an EC2 and tinker around with it, I was like, no, that's going to cost money. I'm scared of what that's going to do if an end user gets onto whatever's being put on that EC2 and it's not working the way it should be. And that's what the core of the issue is its confidence, and it's that ability to know how they learn. So I went on ChatGPT and I told it, give me 50 things to empower a junior. And none of this stuff matters, none of it. You could do all 50, you could do one, you could do none of them. None of it matters. Instead, what you should be aiming for is creating a culture where there is no fear of failure. There is a no blame culture. And I know sometimes that can be tricky, especially if it's a high pressure time during a project. You may have a really important rollout going on. But the important part is if you start to focus on empowering people who either don't know what CDK is like me, have never worked in cloud, or they're just actually scared to deploy something to prod, is give them the permission to fail, the permission to remove that blame, and then allow them to get interested and get confident and sit there and go, you know what, it's fine. I'll learn and I'll go along. And here's some things that you should be aiming for if the phrase permission to fail sounds a bit vague, is you should be building them to build ownership of what it is that they build. So if you throw them into the deep end, that's fine. I've been thrown into the deep end many times. It's a normal thing to do to juniors, to people who are not familiar with technology that they're working with, but allowing them to understand what it is that they're working with and then getting them to feel responsible for what it is. That's how you get some of the most well-built, domain-driven engineers out there, regardless of if it's software, DevOps, that space to fail. If they've messed up a config, if they've spun up the wrong IAM role, if they've ended up setting the CloudWatch alarm threshold to be too low or too high, someone's getting a million emails, let them troubleshoot it, and that's how they're going to learn from it best. So that space of failure, there's no blame, just get them to take ownership. And what you're then going to do is you're going to get them to see the bigger picture. So I actually came from a time where shifting into tech was quite a difficult route if you took a self-learning route or if you took a different route into it. And getting people to see the actual bigger picture of software, it's not just about code. There's a business impact. There's also other stuff that you could be doing for that code. And it's not just writing it, it's deploying and maintaining it. That's something that I think a lot of people now, as those juniors start to go to mid-level and senior, they're going to start seeing. So one way you could do that is talk about your own mistakes. I'm not going to sit here and encourage you all to run up a $50,000 pound bill on AWS. Don't do that. But talk about the mistakes you've made. One of the best teams that I've worked in is they've been very candid about the experiences that they've had. I've worked with people who have worked across Booking.com, Auto Trader, Money Supermarket, a lot of the biggest tech companies in Manchester, and they will sit and tell me stories of how they've made mistakes. So if I'm like, that guy who's worked for 15, 20 years in tech has done that, it's okay if I do that too. And that's what you're going to end up addressing, is this confidence gap on the Dunning-Kruger curve, is there's going to be a time where people are going to go down from this expert to cultured part. They're going to keep sliding up and down. That's going to happen to you all too. This is the reality of working in tech. What you need to do is shift them from maybe a developer to an engineer mindset, see the bigger picture, and see how they best learn in a space where there is no blame culture there. And the benefit to you and your team is you're going to have faster iterations. When my confidence started to go up, a year and a half into my tech career, I didn't feel the need to be constantly asking for help, but more importantly, I actually felt confident in what I was building and what I was putting out there to our clients. You also remove single points of failure. We've sometimes seen some customer stories at Slalom where you only had one guy that knew how to do all of it. Why don't you have two guys that know how to do some of each part? You're going to balance them each other out. And the last part is something I'm quite passionate about, is talent pipelines. I'm quite huge on encouraging people to train your engineers from within. If you've got someone like myself who only knows software, encourage them to pick up cloud, or if you do on-prem, that's fine too. And build that pipeline, because your organization is going to scale, it's going to build up, and it might change over time. So if your engineers change over time, you're going to do that. And if the last thing, if none of this has convinced you, do it for the bus factor, because the reality is if something did happen, it's always good to have two guys instead of one that knows it. Thank you, and I hope we can connect, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. And my younger brother is also in that picture, so feel free to connect with him too if you'd like to. But yeah, thank you. Does anyone have any questions or any musings or insights?
Thanks for the talk as well. You mentioned leadership by vulnerability, where your leaders have to explain how they've gone wrong and all that. How do you get them to open up to you?
I think...
And sorry, before you answer,
yeah.
Does the onus fall on you, or does that need to be a leadership trait that a leader should be by default?
I think one of the things that I've taken away with working in a consultancy is you're going to work in different teams, sometimes for projects. So the onus is a bit on people like myself to bring that comfort level out of the leaders. But I think if you're someone who's really looking to build a resilient team, is encouraging those discussions in a comfortable environment and to get them to pull out stories that they've made about issues or mistakes that they've done is something that I think should be encouraged. But I think it is a two-way street. Is the junior or the person who's new to it should also be encouraging that discussion as well, but the leader should be making more of an effort as well.
Thank you. My next question.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want, as a leader, as a people leader, you want to get your best person on the project, right? Or the person that knows the front end or the back end or DevOps or whatever you're trying to solve. How do you get your people lead or your leader to get you onto a project that you're not, will I say, a fan of, or you're not an expert in?
I think, so the question about being put on a project or a client engagement, so this is more typical in consulting, is I think there's two things. So the people lead should encourage the managers to be more T-shaped. The reality of the industry that we're in is if you kind of commit to a certain one type of technology or implementation, specifically in consulting, that might not let you get onto as much opportunities as you should be. So encouraging someone to be T-shaped is important. But also what I found from personal experiences is actually being candid about my experience. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you I'm an expert on everything, because I'm not. But I have got that willingness to learn. And I know that when I do mess up, I know to take ownership of it. And sometimes communicating that to your client, but also to your leader, is an important thing to do.
Any more questions?
It's not a question as such, but start off, I really loved your talk. There were some definite things that resonated with me. The sandbox thing in particular, it's really important, and the doing, the building, the breaking is so important. So I'm an engineer at Accenture, and we don't specifically have sandboxes to use, but what we have, and I'm sure there's other companies, but the one we've got is a company called My Cloud Guru that does the AWS training. But as part of that, it's like an annual subscription that Accenture pay for us. But as part of that, they have sandboxes. It's just a really good way of limiting the money, because that sandbox is there for an hour and then it's down again. So you can do what you want, and there's no danger of racking up the $50,000 bill. So that works for us, but I'm sure there's other companies.
Thank you. And time for a final question.
Hi, I was just going to ask if you can talk a bit about the Women in Cloud group and what you get up to.
Yeah, so in the Women in Cloud group, it ranges from month to month what we focus on. So one of the favorite things that I like doing is turning up and seeing what they're doing that's new. But in terms of what you can expect is they will do stuff that ranges into very technical topics. So the architecture kata was you're given a case study or an example, and you kind of work with the solution architects to bring together a solution and propose that. The other aspect as well is it's very community driven. So if you're actually sat here thinking, I want to be able to see a certain type of event or talk or topic being explored in cloud that you know that your mentees, your juniors can benefit from, one of the things that we're quite passionate about at AWS Women in Cloud is listening to our community and acting on that. So if there's something that you're quite passionate that you want to learn from people at Amazon, from people within the Manchester tech community, we do that quite well. But also stuff like the public speaking workshop, we run those. We do quite a lot to keep our community engaged and empowered. Thank you. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.